As you pointed out, all of these places, there's no cocktail list. It's you and the owner, one-on-one. It's not, a whole bunch of student part-timers that are getting paid minimum wage to serve drinks. Like these places, it's you and the owner and their record collection. You're just wrapped in this warm blanket of passion and an emotion. And, that's something that's completely missing from, a large part of all the experiences overseas.
Hey everyone, Derrick here again for Speaks Volumes. Now, have you heard about Japanese Kissa, jazz Kissa, listening bars, Japanese-inspired listening bars? They've been popping up all around the world, and I had the opportunity to speak to Nick Dwyer, who has made a brilliant documentary called A Century in Sound, documenting the 100 years, I didn't know there were 100 years of listening bars in Japan, the history, the culture, the people behind them. And why I really lent into speaking to him is that I wanted a cultural translator, somewhat like myself in certain ways for certain genres and areas of music. He's from New Zealand, but he has obsessively documented and directed this documentary and is really passionate about telling the story of why Japanese listening bars exist, where they come from, why they exist, why they are so uniquely Japanese, and also what he thinks about the proliferation of this trend around the world. I think you're going to walk away from this discussion learning so much about history and culture and music appreciation as well as hi-fi. He has boundless energy and passion for this and so much more in music that I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Nick Dwyer Speaks Volumes starts now. Before we get started with this podcast, I'd like to introduce you to the podcast sponsor, which is Squarespace. You guys all know by now that I've been a Squarespace customer for 10 plus years. I've built a really great relationship with them, and they've been kind enough to support this podcast and help bring it to life. So what is Squarespace about? It is a platform for small businesses, creatives, entrepreneurs who want to get online and reach their audience as quickly as possible. And there are so many tools that I could talk about, but I'll list out a few. Squarespace AI, which is a tool they've implemented recently, which just makes everything easier for you. You can drop in a little description of what you want this blurb to be or this paragraph, and AI can write it for you. And honestly, I couldn't write better myself. And so I wrote a little bio for myself, and then I said, could you fix this up? And it was brilliant. And I think I'll be using their tool a lot more often. They also have Blueprint, where you can just, at 5 clicks, you can have your website beautifully designed and ready to go. So if you just want to jump in and have a website done that looks beautiful and reaches your customers with online stores and e-commerce and newsletters, Squarespace is the place to go. So head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to go live, go to squarespace.com/volume and take 10% off your first purchase of website or domain. All right, let's get chatting to Nick. Greetings, everyone. It is Speaks Volumes, and we are deep into the series, and we have a guest for you today that is going to educate us and excite us, I believe, on something that's very interesting to me that I wish I had more experience in outside of the West, but he has plenty of experience. To introduce him, his name is Nick Dwyer. He is a director, a documentarian, a music fan who has worked for a while with Red Bull Music Academy and has made documentaries with them that you should definitely check out. But more specifically, and we'll get into this in a second, he has done a documentary that is doing the festival rounds at the moment that is about Kissa culture, which, if you don't know what that is, we will explain what that is. But coming to us live from Tokyo, Nick Dwyer, how are you?
Very good, Derrick. Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. I don't know how many people know about you, but I think that your voice in this landscape is really important. And we talked yesterday, you are situated in Shimokitazawa, which I think anyone that wants to go somewhere cool goes there when they visit Tokyo. What's the vibe like in Shimokitazawa today?
Yeah, Shimokitazawa is an incredible place. If anyone's familiar with Tokyo, I'm sure everyone knows even if you haven't been to Tokyo, the iconic Shibuya crossing. Shimokitazawa is about 4 minutes by express train from both Shibuya and Shinjuku. It's a cultural hub. It's kind of got proximity to 2 major universities. So in the 60s, it became a place where students hung out. It became a center for counterculture. And, that spirit, is still visible today. It's got more record stores. thrift stores, Japanese curry spots. And what I love the most about it, it's got the biggest, highest concentration of ongaku kissa, jazz kissa, listening bars that you'll find anywhere in Tokyo. And I can step out my door and within, 8-10 minutes, I'm just deep in musical bliss. And that's what I love about it the most.
Incredible. And I think that of all the guests that I've had on this podcast for this season, you and I are probably the most similar, because what I define you as is a music fan, as am I. So you're originally from New Zealand, and you've been living there, as you've told me, since 2017, correct?
It's been an interesting journey, actually. So I started traveling to Japan regularly since 2004. It was once a year. And then, I'd always go back to New Zealand and have these fantastical tales to tell my friends about how amazing it was. And this happened and that happened. And my friends would get bored of my stories. And so I realized I need to bring all my friends and show them. So it became once a year, twice a year. And then I got to a point around about 2012 where I was like, Japan, the magnetism was too strong. I need to move here. I came here for the first time in 2014, myself and, one of my regular collaborators, Tu Neil, we made a documentary series about the history of Japanese video game music and its influence on, kind of global music culture. So in 2014, I was here for 8-9 months. The next year, I was trying to move here. And as we'll probably talk about, regarding the documentary series, I've been working on this documentary series about this history of ongaku kissa music cafes. It will be 10 years coming up at the end of this year. It's a long journey, a lot of problems, a lot of delays. And with those delays came visa issues. So I was, 3 months here, then I was 6 months here, then all of these kind of problems. And then it was only just before the pandemic around 2018 where I can say, like, I live here, Pandemic happened. I had 2 years trapped out. And since the last 2 years, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere.
Like you said, and this is the reason why we're chatting, is that you have a documentary that's doing the festival rounds called A Century in Sound that
Yes.
I have gotten a preview of, and it's amazing, and is documenting what people know as Japanese listening bars or kissa or jazz kissas. And when I heard about this, and I was actually introduced to you by a follower of mine that said, you should speak to Nick. And
Wow.
I looked into it, and we kind of like have been kind of circling each other in certain ways. And I, as many people know, I'm into hi-fi to an extent. I'm into hi-fi and the listening of it more than the like obsession over it, but I'm into that. And I did want to speak to someone that was like, had a hi-fi lens, which I haven't had yet. But then you documenting this culture, which we've all seen start to take over the world in really interesting ways. And I thought, I got to speak to this guy. And I think that one thing that we spoke about and we're quite sensitive around, that I want to acknowledge very early on, is neither of us are Japanese.
Yes.
And I think it's really important that we are coming to this, you are coming to this from on the ground, really putting in the time to really learn and respect it. I'm more of an observer from the outside that's interested in on all types of subcultures. And I want to acknowledge that I want to explore this from a fan perspective and from how you've documented this. But so tell me, why this documentary project? How did this obsession start?
Well, before we kind of go deep into that, there's a few things I want to point out. One of them was that, weirdly enough, the week that you contacted me, I was trying to reach out to you. We've never met before. I was trying to reach out to you because it just so happens that potentially there might be a festival screening in your part of the world soon. And I was thinking, out of all of the people that have come onto my radar recently, that I wanted to alert to the fact that, and I need to say that's a we, and I'll talk about that very soon, that we've been working on this documentary with, out of all the people I wanted to try and get to, because I thought they might appreciate it, was you. And the week I was trying to reach out to you, as they say, slipped into my DM. So it was pretty fun. A wonderful coincidence. Okay, another thing I need to point out is, filmmaking. It's never a solo thing. It's always a team effort. And We have a small team. We're crazily underfunded. But myself, co-director Tu Neil, who's also the editor. We've got a wonderful DOP called Tim Flower from New Zealand, and also a wonderful sound guy, Jeffrey Josan. And yeah, it's been a really long journey. To go back to what, your original question, why this? I need to kind of give a bit of context. I've like you, I've just been a passionate music fan all my life. My whole career since the age of 14 has been kind of fueled by one thing, really, which is me discovering something new musically, getting so excited about it and wanting to share that with people. I started in radio in New Zealand when I was 14. Following year, I started working in music television. This was the 90s, back when music TV played music videos. And, always digging out new music videos, new music, but also, and this is probably where we're similarly aligned. For me, there's two things. I love digging for new music, but I also love digging for facts. And I love researching. And I've always had that thing where researching is almost like being in a record store. And when you find a new fact, it's like, wow, this fact. Because, when you do voice breaks or when you do, breaks, when you're doing music TV, you have to talk about stuff and you have to contextualize, the music that you're playing. And for me, music became a way that I could learn about the world. I would, music on its own is wonderful and it moves us. But when you start giving it a geographic location and a date, and a context, it becomes this whole other beautiful thing. So for me, the two have gone hand in hand since I was a teenager, researching and discovery of music and discovering of the world through music. I did various television shows, especially for a long time about global music culture, documenting music culture around the world. And, I got to about 2013 and I was in a bit of a rut personally and professionally. And Japan had been calling me for a long, long time, for many reasons, but I felt at that time that my relationship with music was different. I'd lost something that I once had. I think that, I always had records. I always worked in record stores. I had a collection of records. I didn't feel the same way about my music collection, my digital music collection. I used to get choice paralysis from Spotify. Yeah, and also sound. I think that, especially in New Zealand at the time, we just didn't have a sound system culture on the level that existed in Tokyo. And the things that one of the main things that drew me to Tokyo was the abundance of record stores. It was, like Disneyland for record nerds. You go to Shibuya, there were hundreds of record stores in Shibuya alone. There was this, strip where it was like, there was a chain. I was really into dance culture and there was, a chain called Cisco, and they had different stores for every genre. There was Cisco House, Cisco Techno, Cisco Drum and Bass. And it was just, and then also sound systems. It was, I would go in the mid 2000s to clubs like Yellow, which is a very famous club, and hearing music for the first time on these systems and going, oh my God, there's just been so much that I've been missing through listening to music through shitty sound systems. That was a big appeal. And so eventually, in 2014, I came here for the first time. And I knew something was missing in my life already. I was searching for something. I didn't know what it was. And I stepped into a 100-year-old classical music cafe called Cafe Lion, which is just up from the, Shibuya crossing, in the absolute madness of Shibuya, the chaos of it. And you step in and it's, it was built originally in 1926. It's the very beginnings of this culture, and it's a classical music cafe where classical music records are played over the most incredible sound system, and everyone sits in silence and listens to records. And I was just dumbfounded, awestruck, and it blew my mind and changed my life, that experience. I had been in, I guess, listening bars, record bars before, but didn't know what they were. On a night out, someone would be like, hey, let's go to this bar. And I'd been to places. But when I stepped into Lion, I had a moment where I realized that there is something bigger here. This is part of a history. And then I just fell deep into researching what I now know as a 100-year history of this reverence and deep passion that Japanese men and women have for the music they love.
And it's such a beautiful story of how that kind of helped rekindle the flame of your like kind of music discovery. For those that don't know, it's ongaku kissa is the longer form. Kissa is what some people see, especially a lot of my listeners are in the West. You see in articles about similar or like trying to be similar-esque Japanese-inspired listening bar. Could you explain from a dummy's perspective, like what are the main elements that make up a kissa or ongaku kissa?
So the word kissa is short for Kissaten, and the Kissaten basically is a coffee shop or a tea house. I think we need to, if we're talking about this culture emerging, we need to go back to the Meiji era, I'm sorry to say. And what we need to do is go back to this understanding that Japan was closed off to the world for 250 years. And around, 1850, 60, the Americans arrived, demanded they opened up their borders. And Japan realized very quickly that the West was way advanced. The Industrial Revolution hadn't happened in Japan. And basically, under the orders of the Meiji Emperor, Japan decided we need to catch up with the West, and not just industrially, but culturally. And they sent their best and their brightest to Europe and to America to study and to learn architecture, culture. And one thing that started up and it became a big craze were these kind of these coffee shops and these tea houses in the late 1800s, where you could experience Western culture, you could experience Western art, and Japanese people became fascinated with this kind of very amazing, refined Western culture. In the early part of the 20th century, these kind of cafes were they slowly but surely they became quite rowdy affairs, and basically the word Kissaten, it was describing these kind of tea houses, these coffee shops. But then around 1926, this place called Cafe Lion started up, and it was one of many that started up that basically wanted to kind of differentiate themselves from these kind of rowdy places in Ginza where, you had taxi dancers and there was dancing and there was alcohol served, and they wanted to differentiate themselves. They became refined places where you would interact with music, and they became the beginnings of ongaku kissa. And I guess I for the purposes of a book that a photo book that we're working on at the moment, which is in conjunction with the documentary, I'm using the blanket term that was used at the very beginning, ongaku kissa. The first obviously was meikyoku kissaten, because that was meikyoku means masterpieces, but it referred to classical music. In the late 20s and early 30s, obviously swing records started to arrive. And that's when people started to say, ongaku kissa, as a blanket term for all of these cafes that played music. The word ongaku means music, kissa is short for Kissaten. And then, eventually, especially in the post-war period, the term jazz kissa evolved. The first establishments in the late 60s that played rock music, like hard rock from the Britain and what was happening on the West Coast, they became rock kissa, and so on and so forth. And all of these contemporary listening bars belong to this 100-year history of, what we can call essentially ongaku kissa.
I love that. It's such a history lesson. I didn't expect that answer. As you said it to me, it's like, wow, this is so crucial to the backstory of something that I thought you would say. It's, it's listening to records in a bar, like not that shallow, but it really goes back, way back, and it seems like it's crucial to the identity of ongaku kissa.
This culture existed only in Japan because of a very different history and very unique set of circumstances, which goes back to being shut off for the rest of the world for 250 years. It goes World War II, what happened in the post-war period. All of these different things were what record places flourished. Another example I can give you is, after Japan was devastated, and Tokyo especially, after the fire bombings of Tokyo in the post-war period in the 1950s, Japan was very poor. No one could afford records. No one could afford hi-fi. And so these places, essentially, what they have always been is their primary function is to serve the community with music. You know, in the same way, I mean, the best way to think about Tokyo is it is a city of endless villages, you know, and in each village, you have your butcher, you have your fishmonger, you have your, you know, your cleaners, and you'd have your jazz kissa or your meikyoku kissa. And that's in the neighborhood where the community goes to listen to music, and the owners, which is a very Japanese, it's a well-documented, very kind of Japanese trait, is this kind of pursuit of perfection. If they're going to present something to people, they want to present it in the best form. And these ongaku kissa is where you could go to hear these records over state-of-the-art sound systems where your patrons would hear it the way it was meant to be heard.
It's a very unique third space experience that is existing to consume and respect and enjoy quite in a solitary way another culture. In the West, if I'm to generalize, you listen to music via concerts, which obviously exists in Japan as well.
Yes.
You know, you concerts or you have a live band, but the reproduction of sound is important to this culture. I guess that might lead me to the next part of the elements of a ongaku kissa, which is the sound system and the reproduction of sound. From what I observe, and your documentary really illustrates this well, is the obsession with sound systems. And I guess it's a two-part question. Why? And it's it can't be such a DIY thing as well. They don't just buy like a speaker system from the shops and put it in. A very like customized, why such a like obsession over sound systems? And then second part of that question is, it seems like a lot of them are American 30s style sound systems. Why that as well?
There's a number of things here. I think that, oh, and by the way, I mean, one of the things I wanted to say at the very beginning, which I didn't get to say because I went off in a certain direction, is like you, I want to be really clear in saying that all I am in regards to this culture is just a fan. I'm you know, I'm by no means an expert. I still feel like I'm a beginner. Over the course of researching this series, my travels have taken me all over Japan. I've visited hundreds and hundreds of these places, but I feel like I'm still a beginner. The real experts are the Japanese people because they lived through this culture. I've only been experiencing this for the last decade, but like you, I'm curious and I've fallen in love with this culture. Through the series, we're dedicated to trying to do the culture the justice that it deserves and to present it to the world as we see it through the series. But I just wanted to say that, to be very clear.
I think the validity of this is that, like, because we have this in common, is that whilst that is true, and we must acknowledge that, we also need cultural translators that respect the culture, obsess over the culture, want to relay it to people that want to hear it in a way that's sensitive and thoughtful. And I try my best. I don't always get it right, but I try my best to do so. And I think that is never going to be that needs to exist as part of this exchange of cultures, because otherwise I can't easily say, for example, Google the dance scene in the Philippines. I need someone to translate and give me analogies and comparisons to, oh, this person's the David Guetta of the Philippines and this person's the Burial of the Philippines. And I go, oh, I understand now. I can put it in my context and my world. So I do think that role is really important. And you can tell that you're taking this on as a responsibility to do it the right way. But yeah, the sound systems. Tell me why that's important.
Okay, there's a number of things here. And again, I don't want to make these sweeping generalizations with regard to kind of unique Japanese characteristics and idiosyncrasies. Pursuit of perfection, you can find this around the world. There are in many industries, there are people all over the world that have a pursuit of perfection. But when it comes to understanding and disseminating foreign culture for a number of different reasons. The Japanese, they go deep in a way that I haven't seen anyone else go deep. They are incredible catalogers. And you know, they are just, I don't want to use the word obsessive, because I think obsessive unfortunately has a negative connotation sometimes, but like they just go deep. If they decide they're into something, they're into it. And I relate to that. I know you relate to that, especially with music. You know, if Japanese people decide they're into something, they want to find out all about it. So they would go to these places, and that's where they'd go to learn about music. They'd go to kind of study through hearing these records on state-of-the-art sound systems. So that's one element that makes up these ongaku kissa. Also, it's the respect that Japanese people have for outside culture. One of the greatest examples I can give of this is if anyone ever goes to the movies in Japan. It weirded me out the first time it happened, but Japanese people, when the credits roll, they sit still. Everyone sits still and waits for the end of the credits. And it's not till the very end that they clap and leave. And that really kind of blew me away, that they just have respect for the movie, everyone that's involved in the movie. That is something else. The respect and reverence that Japanese people have for the culture that they love is seen through, you know, many different mutations of kind of culture that you see within Japan, but definitely seen in these kissa as well. Basically, you got to remember what this is essentially is you're stepping into their world. They're welcoming you into their space. Their personality fills all four walls, every nook and cranny, and they want to share with you their passions. And they hope that you are ready and willing to receive what they're passionate about, and that you engage together over this mutual love that you have. That's what it is. It's a place to share passions. These places are very much about the charm of the owner, which I think is something that is lost in translation through, I guess, Pinterest mood boards and, you know, hype articles about a new listening bar. It's so much a reflection of the owner. And then there's their record collection, it's their knowledge, and then there's their sound system. And now we can start talking about their sound system. So why? I think one of the reasons, one of the main reasons is what I told you before, is this pursuit of perfection and really wanting to do the music justice. Like all of these Japanese men and women that I've spoken to is that they wanted to create an environment for their customers where their listeners could experience recorded music like people were witnessing, hearing the band playing live. That's what they all wanted. They just wanted those records to be given the absolute respect that they deserve the most. And I think as soon as one jazz kissa, ongaku kissa did that, then everyone was like, well, this is what we do. I guess, especially in the boom period of, you know, the late 50s and 60s, jazz kissa especially would differentiate themselves by their speakers. A lot of places favored these, you know, Western electric cinema speakers. Obviously, JBL was at the cutting edge of hi-fi during that time. Altec speakers, you know, and different fans of the culture would be like, oh, I heard this new place is open and they've got like this Altec system that's incredible. And people would travel far and wide to experience new sound systems. Japanese are the best catalogers I've come across of culture ever, and guidebooks would start up from the 50s onwards, and people would travel far and wide to experience different sound systems. Apparently, someone's got the new John Coltrane record and no one's got it. Okay, we got to go across town to hear that record. Because imagine that, all the late 50s, early 60s in real time, big records from Mingus, Miles Davis, Bill Evans, Ornette Coleman. People are like getting that in real time and traveling 20 kilometers across Tokyo because they just hear that one jazz kissa is the only place in town that's got that one record because of what a friend of theirs shipped it over from America. Like, can you imagine what that felt like? Getting a taste of the future, but you have to travel to get that.
And if you're the proprietor, you want, if the people have traveled so far to experience it, you want to make sure that you're giving them a good experience.
100%.
And you want it to sound as good as possible.
Absolutely. So what I'm trying to say is it became caked in to the culture. Like if you start up a jazz kissa, you've got sound is an important factor. And you know, I'm not saying that like they used to compete with each other. In the second episode, which focuses on a particular jazz kissa, you'll remember this incredible man, Yoshida-san, who has a jazz kissa called Jazz Kissa Eigakan. He would go across town and it would experience a new sound system and just be like, it was mind-blowing, and I knew I had to get back to the drawing board because he was building his own sound system. And that was the spirit at the times. Basically, hi-fi was the state-of-the-art technology at the time. And you got to remember, in an era before kind of even televisions or whatnot, if you were a kid growing up in the post-war period, like the coolest shit to do was to build model trains out of transistors and electronics, and you had a fundamental understanding of like circuitry and how things worked from a kid. And then, you know, what can I build next? What can I build next? And then hi-fi was state of the art. So you start playing around with amps and whatnot. And you basically had the know-how and the can-do to build things from a teenager. And then radios became the thing, hi-fi became a thing. Naturally, you're going to gravitate towards building your sound systems, and you want to build a sound system that's better than the other person. So these Japanese people had their own version of kind of sound system culture, building sound systems. And what they had in abundance because of the American occupation and the ongoing presence of military bases was parts, the cutting edge parts, military grade transistors, capacitors, all these kinds of parts. You could go as a kid to black markets in Akihabara or Ueno, and you could buy all the system, all valve amps, anything you needed to build your sound systems. So all of that stuff was going on at the same time.
It's a bit of time travel or a bit of teleportation to be able to create something and then bring that culture into your room or space or Kissaten. Like you said before, television or even color television, this is probably the most accurate way to experience, as you've articulated in your documentary, recreating these jazz clubs, not almost, but to the best of their ability from so far away with these sound systems that can reproduce sound in a particular way. It might not be as obvious to my listener as it might be to you and I, but speakers are speakers are speakers to a lot of people, right? Mm. And you have a Bluetooth speaker, you've got your parents have, you know, a stereo at home, and these are some of these are like stories high. Some of these are gigantic. Do you have any insight in that for our audience as to why it's not like, you know, a little bookshelf speaker in the corner and that's it? Why they're so large and revered for being these cinema speakers?
I'm not an expert. I'm not really deep in you know, in sound culture, you know, speaker culture. Someone like Ojas, all these people, there's a lot of people that I have so much respect for who are very deep into that. But what I can say about the sonic experience is that my kind of journey as well, getting deep into all of these Kissa, kind of coincided with something else happening in my life at the time, which was me you know, questioning and reevaluating my relationship with music, which especially after, you know, nearly 20 years of being very deeply involved in club culture as a DJ, as a dancer, as a fan of all the continual evolutions of dance culture. I basically, you know, I started to question my own relationship with music, in that so much of myself and my friends and so many people I knew, you know, a lot of our relationship with music, when we would interact with music, especially in a nocturnal setting, revolved around, you know, the alteration of the mind. In some way, you drink, you have a bit of this, you have a bit of that, and I think that I was questioning my own relationship with substances in general, and I think what drew me to Japan is that I really wanted to rekindle a very pure relationship with music, I think is the best way to say this, and one that was untainted by drugs and alcohol. Everybody is very different, but I think for me, I'd kind of gotten to a point in my life where I kind of wanted to cut those elements out of my life that had been a part of my life for a long time. And I was kind of going through this own very personal journey of, working towards sobriety. And basically, all my life I've been searching for dopamine hits. During this journey was when I was kind of going deep into these jazz kissa. I would get on night buses and travel all around Japan. And I had these experiences with these sound systems that was like more incredible than any drug I'd ever had. Like I was hearing sound at a level, the best way I can describe it. I had this experience where there's basically, as I said, Japanese are amazing catalogers, and with jazz kissa culture, people have been documenting it through guidebooks in Japan, for decades and decades and decades. And in all my research, people talked about a place called Basie. Basie was up north in Tohoku, the Tohoku region, and it was people like, that's the spot. That is the most incredible sound that you will experience, recorded music on. And so I kind of, that became my mecca. I had attempted to do pilgrimages there a number of times. The owner, guy called Sugawara-san, just his own, makes up his own rules and opens only when he feels like it. And I went there a couple of times, made the 4-hour journey up to Ichinoseki, and it was always closed. And then I finally made it in there, and I had this experience in there where he's just got a JBL system, big JBL speakers. I don't know the actual name, but he has over 5 decades, perfected that system to that room. And I just never heard sound like that before. I experienced this kind of oral hallucination where it was like I had just been the shift from watching black and white films to Technicolor, like the sonic version of that. It was just so incredible. I was in the music. It was all around me. I remember I had this moment where a record came on. It was like Birdland All Stars playing at Carnegie Hall, and I had my eyes closed, and I felt like I was there. Literally, I had this moment where all of a sudden the MC's like, ladies and gentlemen, we're really happy to announce our next artist coming up on the stage. No doubt one of the greatest alto sax players in the world. Give it up for Charlie Parker. And I had that feeling like, when you're at a gig and it's one of your favorite artists, and then all of a sudden turns out another one of your favorite artists is in town, and they bring that artist out, and you're like, what the? I had that feeling like, oh my God, how lucky am I that I get to hear Charlie Parker today? It was the strangest sensation. And it was like a psychedelic experience. And that became a high that I wanted to replicate, was that hearing that again, hearing just sound on that level where it was transcendent. And, another thing that I need to point out that makes these places magic is this shared experience. Like when I was in Basie and I was deep in that record, I was like swimming in that record. I was in Carnegie Hall, and I don't know what my face looked like, but then you kind of have this moment where you break out of it, and then you look across the room, and then there's just this Japanese man, Japanese guy is a construction worker, and he's just deep in it, and you kind of like look at each other and you have this knowing look, and it's just, you kind of have this shared experience.
What an experience to give to your customers, to be able to have such a transcendent experience. And I think to paint a picture, because a lot of people ask me, a lot of my followers or audience ask me about, I don't know what good sound sounds like. And, if I'm choosing things, I'm not really sure what's good and what's bad. It's one of those things that perhaps the audiophile gets a bad rap for, because it can be seen as like really toxic and insular and elitist. But I know my experiences are somewhat similar in that every song sounds good on anything if you enjoy the song. But you have a moment where someone has a sound system or whatever, and you go, hold on, I didn't know music could sound that good. Like, I didn't know that was possible. And you don't think about it. When you're listening with your little AirPods or whatever, it's like, I love this song and this is great and this sounds great, and it does. But then there's a point that it can get to where you do feel like, hold on a second, there are details that I didn't like, hundreds of details that I never knew existed in my favorite song that are now starting to come out, from a breath to a scratch to a, hearing the drumsticks in the hands of it's like, wait. And that's that kind of psychedelic experience you're talking about. Not quite literally, but you're like, I know this song and I've heard this song 1,000 times, and now I'm hearing it in 3 dimensions. And I'm like, hold on a second. This changes, like this feeling changes so much.
Man, at some of those places it was 4 dimensions. I mean, like, going back to what you're saying, that was exactly it. I felt shame. I felt embarrassed because here I was, like, my whole life I've been really into music and my whole career is music. And, I love discovering music and yeah. But I'd never heard music properly. Like, I was like, I just didn't realize music could sound that good. And one thing I'll point out is that everyone that you'll talk to, these Japanese jazz Kissa owners, all of them are striving for a different kind of sonic profile. They have something different, and they get to it through different methods. And depending on the music that they prefer to play, there's going to be different speakers. Like, some of my favorite places, there's a place called Candy in Chiba, and Hayashi-san, amazing woman. She loves things on, well, actually, she loves, things on the freer side of things, but also, you'll hear some of the most sublime Keith Jarrett works being played regularly through her speakers. But she's got a pair of JBL Everest DD 6800s, which are, the top of the line, very formidable looking, kind of modern speakers. And with all the kind of diffusion and all the other things that she's got going on in her room, her sound system is amazing. And, I remember going to her place, and it's all those things you're talking about, like hearing a Coltrane record or hearing Eric Dolphy or Pharoah Sanders and all the breaths. I'd never heard breaths before. And you just all of a sudden, there's an emotional quality in the music that was never present. It's not present on earbuds, or it's just this whole other frequency range. And it's just, you feel like you're feeling the emotion, the intensity of the artist when they're playing, and those breaths, and you start to get a sense of what's going on in the room, and if they're tense. I don't know, it opens up this whole new emotional range on the spectrum that didn't exist before.
I love that detail. I think it breathes new life, as you say, into the music that you love. And I think the best Kissa would do that for any genre. I wanted to know from you about genres and record collections. You said like it's such a representation of the owner. Jazz Kissa is what has traveled as a concept around the world. What are some of the specific collections that you've experienced at Kissas in Japan?
I mean, it's all of the genres. It's everything. I think I think that's one of the things, that's really important that we communicate through the series. The series is called A Century in Sound, and it's 100 years of this culture. There's also, going to be a book that is released to coincide with this, where we are allowed to kind of go a bit deeper and showcase so many more of the places that have meaning to me. But 100 years of this culture. So basically every twist and turn of modern music there is an ongaku kissa for this. So it started with classical music, in the late 20s and then early 30s. They weren't called jazz kissa back then because it was swing music. Swing music was a new thing, but that was just part of ongaku kissa. Obviously, in the post-war period, jazz kissa proliferated. There were still meikyoku kissa, the classical music cafes, but there was a tango kissa. Japan and Tokyo especially went through a massive Latin American boom, And, basically there was a period in the 1950s where tangos, mambos, cumbias, cha-cha-chas, salsas were massive. And a lot of the big Japanese pop stars of the day were performing tracks over, Latin American music. And there's a place in Jimbocho, which is like a book town for anyone that knows Tokyo. There is a spot called Milonga Nueva, which is a tango kissa. And they still to this day, since the 1950s, they just play tango music. As the 60s came around, every different strain of rock and roll, had its own kissa. There were a lot of places that favored, British hard rock, Led Zepp, Motorhead, whatever. Then obviously the West Coast sound became massive in Japan. Buffalo Springfield, all of that kind of stuff. And that's what heavily influenced bands like Happy End, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are very familiar with. But like there are all these places in Dogenzaka that were starting up just around where Cafe Lion is, BYG, a place called Black Hawk, where they were really into that kind of, West Coast sound. Every subgenre of rock and roll, there was a ongaku kissa for this, but around this time in the 70s, through rock bars especially, but also jazz kissa, they served alcohol, but they became a lot of the first notable rock kissa were quite studious. They didn't serve alcohol. You'd be told to shut up if you were talking. And then the unruly cousin, the rock bar, kind of proliferated. And that's when you start to get to contemporary listening bar culture, where they became places to drink alcohol and listen to music rather than just, refined, I'm deep going into these records, drinking coffee culture, which was of the classical music and jazz kissa that came before it. But every genre, there's places in Tokyo that just play soul music. There's a place in the series that was another one of the big inspirations for the series called Nightingale, which plays some of the most experimental and challenging records on earth. But in that space, they make perfect sense. You sit there and be showered with sound from Merzbow records, Alvin Carl Stone, like very experimental composers. You go there and all of a sudden those records are treated with respect and reverence. There are ambient kissa where, you're going to sit and listen to Japanese ambient and, Japanese ambient new age records, but also Arthur Russell records, Brian Eno records. And I'm still on the journey. Like one of the most exhilarating things about falling deep into this culture is that you haven't seen it all. You've only seen the tip of the iceberg. And that the deeper you go, you find some Japanese man or woman that has converted, a room in their house or, taken over a tiny little 6-seater somewhere in a giant block of buildings or 3 or 4 stories underground. There is a little temple that has been devoted to that one genre. It exists. So it's just endless. It's certainly not just jazz.
This is a good place to firstly acknowledge like that is incredible and something that a window into a world that I don't think many of us have seen, because the jazz kissa concept has made it out globally. And yes. I have a feeling that my listenership, my audience, it has a yearning for us to discuss this next point, which is the West and how kissa culture listening bars, Japanese-inspired listening bars have become a trend. It's fair absolutely. To say, a thing that has become very hip to open, as some have been very critical about whether it's genuine, whether it's a marketing ploy. Some people are saying this is great, and it's it's a different perspective on listening culture. So I know that question is, everyone wants to know, I guess, someone that has spent a decade experiencing this and documenting it. From your perspective, do you think the West is ruining kissa culture?
I think that's a bit extreme, the ruining kissa culture, ongaku kissa culture and listening bar culture. Look, I think that first and foremost, who am I? Who am I to have an opinion on that? Like I say, I'm just a fan. I'm someone that has really, really believes in this culture, has fallen in love with these people and these places in Japan. Many of the people that own these these establishments have become my family, like proper family, like my aunts, my uncles, my grandmothers here in Japan, and they're a big part of my life. I see them, some of them almost every day. I call her my jazz kissa grandma. Her name is Misa. She is a jazz kissa called Posy. She's 92. She opens every day, and now I'm a minute away from her place. So it's a big part of my life. But I've never run a business. I've never been under the commercial realities of trying to run a business in a major metropolis where rents are really high. So I don't feel like I'm qualified to critique anyone really who gives it a go. But I have some opinions. I think in general, if all of this is a win for analog culture, for records, I think there's an aspect of that is even if it's a bit of lost in translation or a bit of a distortion of what's happening here. I think that if people are engaging with records again, or even thinking about if these places are helping them think about their own relationship with music, that's a good thing. But we're definitely at a California roll phase of listening bar culture. That's really true. I don't want to offend anyone, but what I will say is that these places in Japan are a reflection of the owner's personality, their passions. It's about sharing with your community. And that's what makes these places incredible. And I've experienced a number of places over the last few years because overseas, people have asked me, have said, oh, you should check this place, you should check that place. There are some places that really get it right. And they've obviously come here, places like Rhinoçéros in Berlin, places like Nero in Berlin. There was an amazing place called Hosoi in Stockholm. I haven't been there, but I hear wonderful things about ESP in Denver. Places like Public Records, I haven't been there, but I know that they get it right. When people have actually come here and experienced it for themselves, and had those kind of transcendent moments that I was telling you about, then I guess they aim to try and replicate that experience with the most respect. But I think what's happening, especially during the pandemic, people couldn't come here. Listening bar culture, Japanese hi-fi bar culture started to take off. People are just looking at Instagram accounts and Pinterest mood boards and going, oh, it's records. It's building a record wall, a collection of records, and it's a sound system that, some Altec speakers, and it's a purely aesthetical thing without any knowledge of what the experience is. And I think the fundamental difference as well is all of these places that we're talking about, they play sides. All of them play sides. So it's a whole side of a record. That's one of the defining characteristics of a listening bar, a jazz kisser. You go there to listen to a side. If you've got a DJ selecting a track and a track and a track, it doesn't matter if it's over an audiophile system, then that's just DJing. You're just a bar with a DJ that has a nice sound system. If you just have a really nice sound system, but people are there to chat and be at the cool place, you're just a bar with a nice sound system. I think the one thing for me, because you nailed it on the head with the word. It's a trend. And I think the thing for me, again, I who am I to have an opinion? But what worries me is that people go to some of these places that maybe they're like, okay, Japanese hi-fi listening bars, Japanese jazz kissa inspired hi-fi bars have become a thing and a trend, and people are like, okay, we want to do that too. But my fear and my worry is that people will go to some of these places where it's not what the culture is here in Japan at all. It's like saying you're a pizza restaurant, but you sell sandwiches. Let's think of an alternate history where Italy's in the Pacific and was closed off the world. Some of the ingredients are the same, but the way they're put together is completely different. And my fear is that people will go to these places overseas that aren't, kind of replicating what a Japanese hi-fi bar or jazz kissa experience or listening bar really is. And people will go and just be like, that was average. I just heard a DJ play some records, and yeah, cool. A DJ was playing records and that was kind of different. And they had this record wall, but I didn't have that transcendent moment that people were talking about and I read about in the New York Times or Guardian, that's the only thing I'll say, is that I think that I worry about it becoming a trend, and because people aren't getting what the real experience is. And all I will say is, like, come here, come to Japan, go to seek out those places that are really doing it, because there are people that are really doing it. And a lot of those people that are doing it the right way have come to Japan and gone, okay, this is what it is, this is what it isn't. And they're trying to replicate that, and full respect to those people, because this is something beautiful. This is this was the answer to what the question that I was seeking out. How can I create a new relationship with music? And I know that for any music fan, this culture is so beautiful and it's so deep, and it's not just jazz, it's every genre imaginable. And to listen to music, just to listen, to forget about everything else that's going on, forget about your phone and just fall deep into records, and to hear records in ways you've never heard before, even some of your favorite records that you've been listening to for more than 3 decades, is a incredible thing. Like, really, really goosebump inducing, and you can get that every day. And that's what these places are. And I hope that people can have that same experience.
To me, the impression I get from what you say is about respect. It's about respect for so many things. It's respect for the culture, especially if you're using it as part of your identity as a Western brand, to say Japanese inspired. If you serve Japanese food or sake, you are attaching yourself to a culture. So it is respect about what it means, what it represents, what it purports to deliver to their customer in Japan. But it's also a respect for music. And I feel like, from what you said and from what I've experienced, music often comes last in the equation of the bars that do it wrong, which is the decor. The decor and the concept comes first. The service or the drinks or the cocktails on the menu come second. The DJs might come third, and the music comes fourth. And I think that it's completely flipped on its head in many ways. In Japan, from what you've explained to me, where it's like the music, how you can hear it the best, how you can experience it as pure as possible. And we don't want to get in the way of that, and everything else is secondary. Because I've seen, especially in a documentary, like, the decor is not hip in a lot of these places. They are like back rooms of your grandparents' house type vibe. But the sound system and the knowledge and respect for a certain genre is where all the energy is put. And I think a trend is always going to happen with anything that's cool or supposedly cool, especially when it's on the internet. But it is about finding the places. If you want to start one, it's finding what's in your heart that you want to express musically. And for the people that want to experience it and find a more pure expression, to your say, that doesn't give a poor representation of Japan, is finding those places that are more focused on the music and how it's reproduced than how it looks.
100%. I mean, as you pointed out, all of these places, there's no cocktail list. It's you and the owner, one-on-one. It's not, a whole bunch of student part-timers that are getting paid minimum wage to serve drinks. Like, these places, it's you and the owner and their record collection, and they want to share it with you. That's what it is. It's when we talked before about the emotional quality in records. There's also this emotional thing in the experience that comes from the owners themselves. And so you get at that, you're just wrapped in this warm blanket of passion and emotion. And, that's something that's completely missing from, a large part of all the experiences overseas. I think if you want to open a bar and just go to buy a whole bunch of dollar bin records from a charity shop, because you want to fill the back of your bar with a cool aesthetic looking like record wall, and you want to just serve cocktails and get guest DJs into DJ tracks, you can do that. You're a DJ bar, or you're a record bar. You're a bar, and that's totally fine. But just you shouldn't say that you're a Japanese hi-fi or Japanese jazz kissa inspired listening bar. You're definitely not a listening bar. And I think that's the only thing I would say. But again, who am I to say? Anyone that is thinking about starting their own version of this, I would say, come here. come here and go to these places and try and seek out that moment I was talking about, that transcendent moment, and get those goosebumps, because that will motivate you to start to replicate that experience. And the more places that replicate the what it is here for real that we have around the world, then everyone wins. I want to be able to, in Tokyo, there's I can throw a stone and hit a kombini. I want to be able to throw a stone and hit an ongaku kissa anywhere in the world. And I think I don't know, I don't want to sound preachy, but I think we all need this in a certain way in this modern era.
And we're all looking for it. There's a reason why people are turning up to it too. I think people want a different expression of music experience that aren't clubs or concerts. I think what you talk about, especially with the relationship with the owner, is so fascinating. And your documentary does present the owners, who are largely quite elderly, and it's quite a historic institution almost, these Kissaten, that is amazing. But similarly, as you allude to in the documentary as well, there's a risk of it going extinct because of the people that run them, the people that care about it in this way, and the fact that it isn't 30-year-olds running it, it's 90-year-olds. So what does the future of Kissa in Japan look like?
On one hand, I don't want to give too much away about the series, but the series moves through a 100-year history, and obviously it finishes with a very contemporary. The final episode, actually in the 5th episode, we go around the world. So we show how the culture has traveled, and then the final episode is back in Tokyo, contemporary overview of the situation. And without giving too much away, I will say that it is being protected for future generations. And what we are seeing through succession, the most obvious form of succession is within the family. Family members take it over. That is happening in the instance where there is no heir. Sometimes regulars get together and then they become part of the succession. There is an amazing new generation that have started up. And that's why I love being in Shimokitazawa. I've got like 3 examples where there's people in their 30s and 40s that are starting their own jazz kissa and doing it right. There's also a new trend. I hate that word trend. There's a new thing happening where there's young Japanese men and women in their 20s who are starting their own jazz kissa or record spot, ongaku kissa, and doing it so right. Because the age of these people that run these legendary establishments, they were all in their 20s when they started their own jazz kissa. Haruki Murakami was in his 20s when he started his jazz kissa, which was called Peter Cat, which I'm sure a number of your fans will know about. Like, yes, they're still around now and they're in their 70s and 80s, but it was a young person's culture when it began. And what's exciting about it is it's a young person, and it's for all ages. So you've got obviously the legendary places, and yes, sadly, some of them being lost to the main kind of antagonist in the story is city development, buildings getting knocked down, but also health and the declining ability to be able to keep the places going. But there is a new generation who are also really motivated by all the stories that have been in Japanese media about Japanese jazz kissa culture taking over the world. So like it's fueled a more momentum around listening bar and ongaku kissa culture in Japan. And like I say, you can go out any night of the week and, find a new place. And the best way when people have asked me like to describe Tokyo is it's a city of endless doorways. And behind one of those doorways, a man or woman just might have built a temple to that one thing that you love, be it a sneaker, a regional dish from a European country, or whatever microscopic subgenre of music that you're into. And yeah, it's just the feeling of being in the midst of that infinity is it's just so wonderful.
I spoke to on my podcast Jojo and Tinzo, who run the YouTube channel and party called Book Club Radio, and I think that what I found really interesting, and I still take away learnings from, is that they grew up. They're in their mid-20s. They grew up because boiler rooms have been around for almost 15 years, right? So, since they were 10, they might have been exposed to some form of it. And if you were to ask me before book club came around, what is the next generation of boiler room, I wouldn't think it was that, which is like, cross-generational, themed parties and dress ups, and it's really positive and quite open and quite inclusive, and the total opposite from the club culture that boiler room protects and celebrates. And I think that globally and locally, I look forward to the version of Kissa culture that we probably can't even imagine, that that the youth will take what they love about it, but then remix it in a way that we wouldn't think, oh, that's how you should do it, but then takes it to another place entirely, that like book club has to rejuvenate it. And the trend has maybe not rejuvenated it, but brought it to a new audience. But then it will go through another cycle of like, well, what are the best bits once the trend goes away? And what are the bits that can make it into a brand new thing that can last for another 100 years?
See, that's what I'm excited about. I think when it's done best, it's when someone puts their unique spin on it. Like what is the version of the culture from Japan that you could only do in London, or you could only do in Sweden? And I'm excited about the idea of, I want to go to London and I find out that there's a new Ghanaian and Nigerian high life Kissa, where it's just golden era Nigerian high life, or Congolese soukous, or whatever genre of music from Sweden. I want to see and experience ongaku Kissa for every genre imaginable in the world, and that's the only place in the world I can go to where that guy or that woman or man or wonderful human has the best collection, the deepest collection of Panamanian calypso, or whatever microscopic subgenre. That's what I'm excited about, because it's like what is everyone doing differently? I want to go to a post-punk Kissa, that's what I'm excited about. Is like what can you do that you can only do in that city, or what's your unique contribution to it through your record collection and your curation?
I think that's the perfect way to end it. That's what we should look forward to. I think that's what will happen once. And these conversations, as much as we both put up our hands that we aren't the expert, these conversations are vital to be a conduit for people to really get excited about how can we experience and express music in new ways. And I think it's appropriate to end it how you said it, that the best and most beautiful experiences are the owner and their record collection, which is, I think, in any music expression, such a pure way to experience music. Nick Dwyer, A Century in Sound, will come to screen somewhere. It's making its way, slowly but surely, and the most promising way, to people's screens. And I really look forward to people seeing it, and really look forward for people to feedback on this conversation. So thank you so much for jumping on this podcast.
Derrick, thank you for giving me the opportunity. It was really, really great talking to you. And I can't wait for you to see the rest of the series. And all I will say is that, working on things so that we can get it out to the world so that everyone can see it. But yeah, definitely there's going to be ways to see it very, very soon. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak this last hour.
My absolute pleasure. Nick Dwyer Speaks Volumes. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Derrick.
I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation with Nick Dwyer. He's so passionate. He has so many stories, and he told me on our pre-call that he's the tangent king, and he definitely is, but he always brought it back. He's a music journalist and radio host, and you can tell he always brought it back to the heart and the soul of the discussion and the question. And it was wonderful to hear someone so deep in it and to kind of find a kindred spirit in a different way who really loves everything about music. This podcast was produced by Julia Wang. The branding was designed by Jonny Sikov. If you would like to support the podcast, you can find me on Patreon. If you particularly love this episode, I'd love it if you shared it or some of the social clips with your friends so they can check it out also. And if you are ever so willing, I'd also appreciate if you gave it a star rating on your app of choice. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Speaks Volumes. My name is Derrick Gee. See you next week.